Hi, I'm Ingrid Tischer, and this is What's Your Fundraising Origin Story? I am a director of development. I'm a trustee with the Awesome Foundation Disability Chapter, and I started a thing called the Disabled in Development Project. And yet, even with all that, I think a lot of times I still don't think of myself as a quote unquote real fundraiser. And I'm doing this video because I think that sharing our stories is something that makes us better leaders inside and out. And skills, yes, are critical, but skills are really more about surviving in the work. What I want to talk about is something that's going to, I hope, be more about thriving, because I want you to thrive in fundraising too. So I'm going to share my fundraising origin story with you and how it shaped my work in ways that I actually have only really come to appreciate very recently. And for me, at the outset, I want you to know that fundraising and philanthropy as a whole have not really typically felt like they're my place to be in. It's not my space. It's not the place where I feel like I naturally belong. And I know I'm not alone in this way, but it's something that is really quite deeply felt. And I guess I always assumed I felt this way because I knew that I grew up, not having money. And the thing that my family would have talked about was, something like getting a job, not managing assets. Assets were something that rich people had. And in the way that fundraising was about, rich people talking to other rich people. And being disabled, I'm from a community that, well, having a job is actually more like a privilege. And I feel that way to this day. So the thing I realized recently was that I have been carrying around and into my work a lot of really deeply ingrained internalized ableism, which is pretty crazy because I work in, disability rights. That's what I raise money for. And I didn't really understand, though, that I have a lot of feelings about being in constant, close professional proximity to fundraising practices in other organizations and in the sector that objectify and dehumanize disabled people, even, without getting any sort of criticism for it. And although my organization and I, of course, don't participate in that, it's nevertheless part of my professional world. And when you fundraise, stuff like that is going to be part of your world as well. And figuring out my fundraising origin story has been helpful for me in finding my place in that world and really owning it, which feels very different than, feeling like, oh, I can handle being in here, but it's not really where I belong. And do I wish that I had done this, let's say 30 years ago when I was starting? Yeah, I do wish that. And part of that is why I am here talking about this with you now, if in case you're closer to the beginning of being in the fundraising world than, near the end of your time there. So here goes. This is my fundraising origin story. Once upon a fundraising time, I was about 6 years old. I was with my mom. We were in the Wegmans grocery store. We were in the checkout line. And somewhere right about an eye line with me, there was a cardboard donation box, yellow. And it was asking people for pennies. And it was for the girl who was pictured on the box. There was a photograph. This photograph showed a little girl, and she wore a couple of different very heavy looking metal braces. And I noticed those because I had a couple of years earlier started having to wear a Milwaukee back brace for scoliosis. And I thought in general, she kind of looked a little like I did. And it was a little startling. The thing was, I realized that I immediately knew I didn't want to be that girl. This girl was on a cardboard donation box in the grocery store, and the box was begging people for pennies, you know, for her. And I did not feel like that had anything to do with who I was or who I wanted to be. Now, let's say it's 3 years or so later, and I am a Girl Scout. I am a happy Girl Scout. And of course, our troop is doing cookie sales. So it was the first time I was doing them. And I am now in the afternoon after school, and I'm going door to door in our neighborhood, which is not unusual given that it was the 1970s. And the thing is, though, I'm coming up to houses for our neighbors where there are steps and maybe no railings, and I cannot climb those steps. So what I do is I crawl, and then I manage to get to my feet somehow, knock on the door, and try to sell the cookies. Getting down was always a little easier, but a little treacherous. And I have to do this in the afternoon that I'm thinking of, several times. So those two situations, they are kind of near the core of what I carry around every day as a development professional, as a trustee for a fundraising, body, and in helping other people tell their stories in development. So the question I come up with, of course, is why did I do that thing as a Girl Scout? That's, of course, the first question I kind of interrogate myself with. And I think I understand now why. I crawled up the steps because I needed to raise the money. I needed to raise the money because I wanted to be a good Girl Scout in my troop. And fundraising was part of what you did to be in the fundraising troop. And being in the fundraising troop was something where, I felt like I belonged. And I wanted to belong because everybody wants to belong. And I also really, for me in particular, I did not want to be, again, that girl on the donation box. That person was a person who people give money to because they felt sorry for her and because her image instantly told a story of unhappiness and need. Those were not things I really wanted to instantly make people think. And also because I also didn't want to be spoken of in those terms by other people. In this case, it would have been the actual fundraisers. Now, the other reason, of course, why I ended up crawling up the steps as a Girl Scout to sell the cookies was because I thought that going door to door like that was the right way to sell the cookies. It was the way other kids were doing it. And I felt like because it was the way other people were doing it, it was the right way. And that meant it was the way I had to do it. And it didn't really even occur to me to question, whether I could find another way. I think when I got home, my mother, tried to alert me to that because I don't recall going out again after that one day. Thank goodness. Even at that age, I was aware that the donation box itself was all kinds of messed up. And I also knew that I didn't or shouldn't have to crawl up any front steps for any reason. And I think at that age, in that moment, I thought that because I understood that these situations were messed up, I thought that it meant then, of course, I can handle whatever feelings come up from having to do that. My thought was like, oh, I can handle this. Yeah, I understand it. I get it. And I have to say, I still have feelings about this, as you can probably tell. And so I'm taking a minute here to catch my breath. like many people in marginalized communities, I'm not alone in this. Part of my fundraising origin story, is about realizing I was in a really lousy situation. And yet my first feeling was like I had to deal with my first responsibility to get the job done, whatever the situation was. And if I had feelings about it, I would deal with them later on, whenever I had time. And when I did think I was dealing with those feelings, I tended to think about them like, oh, again, I can handle this. It wasn't good, but I can handle it. Or it wasn't so bad. Or, I got through it. So, and this would be even while I was also feeling, that however I did get through it and however I did get the job done, that it was somehow still lesser if I hadn't done it the way that other people do it, even when those ways were clearly not accessible to me and creating the access was not within my power. All right, so given all that, why do I value knowing this story? Why is it helpful to understand my own fundraising origin story? And why do I think it will help you? Well, in my case, my origin story gave me a framework for my own work that I felt good about. And framing is everything. In my case, I know that I don't raise money for charity, and charity is a super common, still persistent frame. What I do is I raise money for justice. Second, even when I wasn't completely aware of it, my fundraising origin story, it was showing me the values that I consider to be non-negotiable in my own fundraising practices. In this case, it was, for example, I know really clearly that I will not include people as props in fundraising. If they're going to be there, they will be respected and represented as people. And I know what that actually looks like. Third, and maybe most importantly, my fundraising origin story helped me acknowledge how deep my own internalized ableism goes. It's not just a problem out in the world. The world has inevitably rooted itself in me to some extent. And being aware of that is the first step in taking better care of myself over time, persevering in the work, and really getting what I need, especially around my mental health. I was recently this year diagnosed with depression and anxiety, probably had it my whole life. And I have that in addition to having a physical disability called muscular dystrophy. It's really unlikely I could have grown up in this culture and not internalized, the ableist attitudes. And I really think for me, it's going to be a lifelong unlearning. Okay, so I also want to say that it could be that your fundraising origin story isn't more cheerful. Maybe it's about how you grew up going to every week to a really incredible church. And every week you saw that whatever people gave, it was really welcome and it was really respected. And so were the people. That's a fantastic fundraising origin story. Or maybe you two were a Girl Scout and your troop, though, did things in a more accessible way. These things are all possible. But it's also possible that because our communities are often really, dealing with a lot of poverty, it's possible that when the word fundraising comes up for you, you were a child who perhaps was on the receiving end of those donations. And that was done in a very public manner that you were not really comfortable with. I think you deserve support and understanding from your fellow board members and the people around you in understanding that, you know, fundraising is not always going to be something that you do and are done with and you never think about again. Sometimes those encounters reverberate within you and it can bring up things that you weren't really expecting. But anyway, regardless, what I want you to know in closing is that I think whatever origin story you tap into, it's probably going to be your greatest source of power as you go about fundraising. It's going to be like that fuel that keeps you going. Because don't forget, you know, an origin story, you know, is typically seen as how we understand how a superhero got to be a superhero. So I'm not suggesting that you have to be a fundraising superhero at all. Just be a fundraiser. And I hope that understanding what exactly you bring to it will make it something that brings you joy in the work as much as it brings help to your organization. Thanks.